Eric, great having you on the podcast here today. How are you?
I'm great, Jared. Nice to be here.
Let's kick things right off. We tend to keep these short and sweet, and I would love if you could first tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then kind of tie that in for the bringing us to like the Alliance for Trust in Media. What is it? What are you working on today? But let's start with your background.
Okay. Well, I often describe myself as a longtime business journalist and media executive turned do-gooder, but I'll elaborate on that for a second. I grew up through legacy media covering business journalism for the most part. So covering Wall Street and then eventually entrepreneurship and innovation. So among the titles where I had significant roles were Money Magazine, if you recall that, a powerhouse of the Time Inc. family in the 90s and early aughts, Fortune Magazine, Business 2.0, one of the magazines that had the Internet 1.0 fill its sails for a long time. And then Inc. and Fast Company, which is where I ended that phase of my career as the editor-in-chief and president of Inc. and eventually the CEO of both Inc. and Fast Company, its sister publication. But my career pivoted on a day that I regard as one of the more shameful days in American history, which is January 6th, 2021. And watching those people, that crowd, invade the U.S. Capitol, kind of the symbol of American democracy, because they had been misled about what happened in the election a couple months before, made me realize that misinformation as a challenge for my generation was a serious thing. And by comparison, working on keeping Inc. and Fast Company afloat seemed like a rather minor task, or at least by comparison. I had been at the job for 10 years. I had brought the two companies to their first year of profitability ever. And I just felt like that's a good milestone. And here is, I could say the universe is calling me to do something different. Out of that moment came the Alliance for Trust in Media. And I can tell you a little bit about the origin story, which was a chance meeting between me and Benjamin Toff, who is the research director of the Alliance for Trust. Toff is one of the lead researchers on a project, a 3-year-long project out of Oxford University that was funded by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, which basically surveyed people around the world to gauge their trust in legacy news organizations. So after 3 years, this guy knew everything there was to know about how people feel about traditional journalism. What he told me, though, is that for all the data that we have about what people think about journalism, and the Oxford study was not the only study. There's Gallup and Edelman Trust Barometer and so forth. For all that research, there's no research on what newsrooms can actually do about it to rebuild trust, or what civic organizations can do to rebuild an understanding of factuality that'll bring people back to a shared reality. So that became I guess you would say, the inception of the Alliance for Trust in Media. So what we do is to send researchers into newsrooms to document and implement innovations that the newsroom wants to try to rebuild trust with their audiences. Right now, I'm happy to say we're working with Chicago Public Media, the Texas Tribune, Minnesota Public Radio, helping them implement new things that they want to try. In some cases, we're raising the funding for those things. And then we document it. And the only thing we ask of the newsroom is that they allow us to use the research that we generate to inform other newsrooms about what works when it comes to rebuilding trust. And the other thing the Alliance does is to teach media literacy to adults. So there are other organizations that help school systems, for example, bring that into their curriculum through K through 12 students. But adults, especially adults who did not grow up as digital natives, need to develop those kind of healthy skepticism about news that comes over their news feed, maybe even more than younger people do, not least because they may be more susceptible to misinformation and rumor, but because they vote. And so the Alliance teaches media literacy through universities, civic organizations like the League of Women Voters, and through companies, too, that see fostering a sense of critical thinking skills among their workforce is a valuable skill to to give them.
On a separate note, I feel like you need to be reading like a book to me or something. Like you have like the perfect radio, like podcasting voice. Um,
Well,
it,
thank you.
I mean, what you're saying is super interesting, but it gets like 10x because of how you're. It's just I had to say that. Um, now I would like to hear a little bit about. So you talked about that part of the deal is you're allowed to get some of these key. You're allowed to keep these key findings and inform others, right? So
Hmm.
what are you seeing that's maybe working? What isn't working? Are you allowed to share that with us today?
We're at early stages, but I can tell
Okay.
you some of the inklings that we have right now. A couple of things really matter. One is meeting the audience where they are. So, a lot of our partners right now, their default, their flagship, if you will, is a website. That's fine, but it's not where audiences necessarily are, especially younger audiences. So they have been experimenting at delivering their news on TikTok or Instagram or other vertical video platforms. The idea being that, if you're there on the feed along with, updates from your friends and family and the celebrities you follow, will that be more trusted? And the early results are, yeah, it actually works that way. And maybe not just because you're there where the people spend a lot of their time, but also because it's such a personal platform. It's just such a medium in which you feel like you have a relation with an individual who's on camera or on audio, which is different from a relationship you might have with an institution. So that's one thing. Another thing is what really seems to matter a lot to people, for obvious reasons, is transparency. The Texas Tribune, for example, is experimenting with having a person in the newsroom, a leader in the newsroom, too, a responsible person, on the other end of a texting platform to take incoming concerns from conservative, rural Texan readers who may be inclined not to trust, news that comes out of the blue bubble of Austin, Texas, and to respond in a forthright, transparent way to those incoming messages about, say, why the Tribune covered the news it did, or why it didn't cover some other news that these people may feel they should have covered, and why the results were what they were, why they decided to go with the stories they went. The idea, and we don't have the data on this yet, is that if you just tell people what you're doing and why, some of the mistrust, which is based around kind of the black box that so much of traditional media is now, will go away, and you'll build trust. You may not convert, the people on the other end of the text to your political orientation. That's fine. That's not the point. The point is just to make them feel like you really do have the interest, in this case, of Texans in mind when you do the work you do as a newsroom. And that I think has the potential to get real traction.
That's interesting. It's providing that additional context that sometimes checks a box in people's heads because why did you write about this? Because of this. Like just knowing that from a, consumer perspective, I feel better about certain things because, I know that, well, a lot of people are hearing this, but this is actually what happened. And here's like some details. Like that could be you'll have to keep us up to date on how the kind of study plays out with that, because that's very intriguing. And it sounds like when you go into these like relationships, do you already kind of have, that sounds super interesting. Do you already have some sort of like, I think this is going to happen with this if we do this?
Yes, we do. Ben Toff has a good sense from his work at Oxford. He's now, by the way, at the University of Minnesota Journalism School. But he has a good sense of what might work and where people's sensitivities are and where they see gaps and what causes mistrust. In other cases, the kind of instinctive experiment that the newsroom wants to try comes from the newsroom itself. And the Alliance's goal is to be as accommodating as possible to the newsroom. After all, it's their personnel who are trying this out, and they have their own goals about making their newsrooms sustainable. So we want to, obviously, we're not just in this for the academic glory of building a knowledge base. We also want to help these newsrooms sustain and succeed financially.
I want to shift focus a little bit. Given, we first connected through Human X conference, which we can talk a little bit about that at the end, because I'm super excited and it's quickly approaching. Let's talk about the role of AI in news media, both today and then how you see that continuing to evolve in the future of media.
That is a great question. And of course, it is a question that's on everyone's mind. I think it's important to point out that the role of AI in media has been going on for a long time. And it points out a lot of the issues that the whole society needs to be aware of as they adapt to this totally transformative new technology. So everybody knows that traditional media is hurting, that its business model has been disrupted by social media. And the reason is artificial intelligence, and not large language models like ChatGPT and all those things that do those amazing and eerie and kind of seemingly magical things, but behind the scenes kind of artificial intelligence that drove ad technology and recommendation engines. The reason that social media ate legacy media's lunch in the advertising space was that it was and remains much better than traditional media at targeting audiences. Though a traditional advertiser might buy an ad in, just to pick a place that I used to work, Fortune magazine, because they thought that that was a great place to where the Fortune aggregated a lot of business executives, and they wanted to reach business executives. But now with social media and the data, that the highly personalized data that social media platforms have, they can find business executives wherever they happen to be online. And they don't need to go to a place that claims to aggregate them. So why would you not advertise on Google or Facebook or Amazon? Because that gives you a much better purchase on your audience. And the other thing that where AI has made a huge inroad in traditional media is in ad technology. So that data, that the personalized data that all the platforms have on you and me and everybody else, is useless unless that can be used to direct ads to you and me and everybody else. And so that's what ad technology does, is taking sort of the inventory of ad space that might appear on Amazon or Facebook or Fortune magazine, and then running it through an auction system that happens instantaneously, faster than you or I could even notice, and then serving ads to you and me wherever we happen to be. So that also is a product of machine learning, which is the old name for artificial intelligence. So that has been around for a long time. And I would say that as we look forward at the role of artificial intelligence in our lives to come, is that this is a really important lesson in the alignment problem. So as Tristan Harris of the Center for Humane Technology often says, we had one first encounter with artificial intelligence through social media recommendation engines and advertising technology. And as far as the human race goes and democracy goes, it didn't work out that well for us. It wasn't that people running social media organizations or ad technology companies were bad or evil. They just wanted what they wanted, and artificial intelligence made decisions to deliver that without regard to the things that might occur to you and me, without regard to the health of democracy, without regard to whether it would increase division, political division, without regard to whether it would be good or bad for the mental health of young women, to cite another example. So the request made of machine learning when it comes to recommendation engines on social media is, I just want to increase engagement because that will increase our advertising sales. No one said, and we want you to drive a wedge between blue states and red states. No one said we want you to prioritize misinformation that will be harmful to our users. They just said increase engagement. But it so happened that the machines quickly learned that the things that increase engagement are those outrage promoting, division producing pieces of news, regardless and regardless of whether they're true or not, because that did not matter at all to the algorithms. And here we find ourselves now at a totally new stage of artificial intelligence promotion where the power of the technology is evident, even though where it might take us is not. And we just have to be careful of what we ask it to do for us, mindful of the fact that it's going to be making decisions on its own based on directions we give it, where we don't necessarily have the ability to anticipate what the ramifications and the unintended consequences will be.
When it comes to like key highlight summaries at the top of posts now, like Yahoo does a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've had this for a while. This isn't just with these summaries, but I like the fact that there's like a feedback, like there's the thumbs up, thumbs down. Like, was this a good summary for you? And I know we've done that on like articles and posts in the past, that this is not something new, but I feel like it stands out a lot more with these summary sections. And I don't know, as a consumer, it definitely feels good to be able to provide that easy thumbs up, thumbs down feedback to whether it's to the post or whether was
Mm-hmm.
this summary useful to you. What is the key to then taking that feedback to actually, because sometimes a lot of companies just take this feedback and maybe do nothing with it, but it makes you feel good that you're collecting it. So like, what what are you like if you're putting your prior experience hat on, right, from what you were doing before? What do you look for in that type of information, and how does that or does it impact it at all what you were doing?
In a couple of ways, Jared.
Mm-hmm.
I'll address quickly what might happen with those thumbs ups and thumbs down, and I say this without any inside knowledge of how
Mm-hmm.
different platforms use them. But my guess is that the sense of empowerment that they give you in many cases is kind of a smokescreen. And the idea is not necessarily that because you gave us a thumbs down, we're going to take to heart what you said and improve and get better. I think it's just going to go into the data file, the massive amounts of data that they have on you, is that Jared doesn't like this summary. And so that will allow us to make some assumptions about how we can monetize him. So I don't think that that's, or we can be better at recommending products and stories to him. The other thing about those summaries is that, yeah, they're time savers. I'm glad to have them myself in a selfish way, even though I recognize that what they're doing is kneecapping a big source of traffic for traditional media sites. So when I was at Inc. and Fast Company, an awful lot of our traffic came from Google search or Facebook recommendations. And then we could monetize it. People would click through a link to one of our stories and get, familiar with what the journalism work that we did and get a story that had a lot of context more than a thumbnail summary would provide them, and so forth. So that traffic is now cut off. And the other really confronting thing for someone who's came up through traditional media is that those summaries are created in most cases with data that was taken from legacy publishers with no compensation. So to add insult to injury, not only are we, shutting off the flow of traffic that we used to direct to you, the platform says to the publishers, but we are stealing the information that your journalists created and monetizing it ourselves. These are, this kind of dynamic is the cause behind the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI. It's what accounts for the vast sums that you see quoted in deals between the AI platforms and publishers like Reddit and The Atlantic and the AP and Reuters and so forth. This kind of transaction is still at a very early stage. We don't really know what the market is, what those data tokens are produced by traditional media are worth to the platforms. But it does seem that to some extent, publishers are aware that they really got taken to the cleaners the first time around. They'd like to avoid that happening again. I'm not sure that the plan for preventing that is actually very well thought out yet.
You know what's kind of my personal favorite, Eric? It's kind of laughable. It's when you see the deal, like the licensing of the content deal between two parties, where the tech company kind of already took it's almost like, instead of you suing us, we'll do a licensing deal now because we already took the data. It's funny. And that happens a lot.
Yes, it does. Yes, you're right.
Last question for you as we wrap up here. So last 30 seconds or so. What are you looking forward to from the HumanX conference coming up very soon?
I think that any conference that aims to talk about the human side of artificial intelligence and chart its future is going to be beneficial to the media industry as well as to society as a whole. It seems clear to me that whatever media does to dig itself out of the hole that it's in, it's going to involve the wise use of artificial intelligence. So I really am looking forward to meeting the best brains on the topic in March and hearing what they have to say and looking for what they have to say about the way forward.
I love it. Awesome. Eric, thank you so much for joining me here today. Look forward to seeing you in Vegas very soon.
That'll be great.